afternoon, and welcome to our Glendale City Council workshop. This meeting is for council members to review and discuss important issues, projects, and future council meeting agenda items. It's a work-study session only and allows the council to hear input from city staff. No action will be taken at this workshop, and there will not be an opportunity for public comment. This meeting is streaming live on Glendale's Facebook and YouTube pages and the city's cable television station, Glendale Channel 11. Thank you for joining us.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session, April 11, 2023. The meeting is called to order. It's my understanding that Councilmember Aldama is calling in. Is that correct? Brent?
Yes, Mayor. I think we have him on the line.
Okay, Councilmember Aldama, are you on the line? All right, well, we'll see if we can get him online. Councilmember Hugh, are you present?
Here.
Councilmember Mellner?
Present.
Councilmember Tomachoff has an excused absence. Councilmember Turner?
Present.
Vice Mayor?
Here.
Chairman's present. We'll wait one more second here and see if we can get Councilmember Aldama on the phone.
They're having some technical difficulties with getting the council.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. If Councilmember Aldama comes on, if you can list him. Item number one, we're not doing. We're going directly to item number two.
Council item of special interest, administrative policy update.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide staff report is Deputy City Manager Brent Stoddard.
Great, thank you, Kevin, Mayor, members of the council. First of all, I apologize for some of the technical difficulties. We can hear the council member, but we can't patch him through. And one of the staff members who usually runs the control room was out today, and so we have some of our other team trying to help. So we're hoping that he can get patched in here very quickly. So the council member Aldama had asked the city manager to take a look at reviewing the administrative policy for the council item of special interest. This, of course, is the standing item on a workshop where the council can bring forth items that are not an agenda, they're not part of any programs, to ask staff to take a look at it. So the manager has developed a policy. He developed a policy back in 2016 directing staff of how they should respond. We had these council items of special interest stacking up and taking quite a bit of time to get through. And so over the last few months, we've been trying to aggressively push the backlog of these items through. You've seen many of them on the last few agenda items over the month of April and May. You're going to see several more come on. But I wanted to walk you through, and Councilmember Aldama had asked that we walk through the process so that the council and the public themselves know kind of what's happening behind the scene when an item is brought forward by you and as it comes forward and back to council. And so I wanted to walk you through that process right now, and the public as well. So essentially, as we said, the council raises a council item of special interest during the meeting. Within 48 hours, the city manager will send an email to the council member, letting them know which director he is assigned to take the lead. Oftentimes you might hear other council members say, well, I agree with that, or I support that as well. But we're working directly with the council member who assigned it, and all of the approvals and things that go forward from that point will be done through the requesting council member. The director then that's assigned is responsible for scheduling a meeting. We call it a scoping meeting with the council member, essentially to sit down and figure out what exactly it is they would like the council to consider moving forward on. So that entails a meeting, a discussion. Within 7 business days of that meeting, the director will email a draft scope trying to capture that conversation and that discussion with to the council member. and also to the city manager's office. And then there's some period of back and forth if it doesn't quite catch exactly what they wanted or things need to be tweaked. The goal is to come to some agreement that, yes, this is what the scope looks like and should be. And then either two things can happen at that point. If a council member feels like the information is more routine or kind of readily available and staff's able to put it together in a memo or some type of other vehicle of information, then that's agreed upon and then that communication is sent out and the item is closed. If the scoping meeting results in the council member providing a scope of work that needs to go to the council to get consensus to move forward, that would then be the next step. So we have the scope finalized, having met with the council member. There's an additional step for that staff member, which is to put together a scoping assessment, which essentially just means an analysis of what it would take to accomplish what the council member is asking for, the number of staff hours, or if there's consultants that need to be hired, or if there's money or resources that need to be made available. And that information is important because the next step is to go to the council, not necessarily to discuss the specific issue or item, but the next step in the process is to go to the council and see if there's consensus from a majority of you to move forward with that item. So as a legislative body, one member can bring this item up, but one member of the council can't just direct staff or direct additional resources that haven't been budgeted for or direct a new project. It would take a majority of you. So that first meeting back is to present that scoping document and then to see if there is a majority of you that would like to move forward in directing staff to take the next step and start working on the things that are in that scoping document. If there is no consensus, then of course the council item of special interest would be closed at that point. If there is consensus for staff to move forward and bring back additional information and the other parts of that were outlined in the scope, then that would trigger the next step. That initial meeting that we talk about with the council, where a majority of you would give consensus, the goal is to have that happen within 60 days of that scoping memo having been completed and signed off by the council member. It of course can happen sooner than that, but that would be the deadline that we would be looking for. Essentially, it's the next, it would be impossible from the filing deadlines and to getting it into the system to hit the next meeting after a scoping document, but it essentially makes available the next 3 workshops after that scoping document's approved. So if the councils give consensus, yes, please come back with additional information, start working on that. Then the director then will start working on a formal council report agenda item, like you see regularly with your agenda items that come forward on the agenda, where they're providing detailed information now and providing information for you guys to be able to have your policy discussions. And so that council report essentially will then go to a council member and the city manager, same type of process, make sure everybody's agrees that that's what we're working on. Once it's been approved, then a workshop item will be scheduled where staff will come back and present that information, and then of course look for council consensus or direction to continue that item. That second workshop would be within 60 days of that previous workshop where a majority gave permission to move forward. Again, essentially not including the very first meeting after that workshop, but it essentially provides 3 workshops after that last meeting that an item could be placed. If a timeline is different or it's going to take longer, the policy requires the department head to work with the council member and in writing make sure that there's an agreement about when that date would come back to us. And then as that item then moves forward as a full council item for that second meeting, it's either completed at that point and closed as a council item of special interest, or if it's going to be continued, at that point now we've received council consensus to move forward. We've had a second workshop where they're providing direction. At that point, it would not be a council item of special interest. It would now be included in the department's function and assigned and tracked by a department head or the assistant assistant city manager over that area. As I said before, we appreciate the council's patience. We've been working through kind of a backlog of these. The list is, I think there's 11 outstanding council items of special interest at this point, and over the next few months, we should have that reduced to just a handful that are left to either be tracked or are still working in the process. So, Mayor, with that, be happy to answer any questions, but that's the process that we've outlined now for the council items of special interest. The city manager's office has sat down and gone through this in detail with the department heads to make sure that they understand what's expected of them. And our goal and our hope is that we meet these deadlines and that we're able to process the council's requests as they come forward.
Councilmember Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Stoddard, it seems to me that there's a step missing in here that maybe occurs between step number 2 and step number 3. And that's where the city manager just simply vetoes a council item of special interest. I have twice requested that as a council item of special interest that we receive a business plan for the amphitheater, perhaps a list of the types of acts that might be contracted to perform in there, an example of other cities that have a similar successful amphitheater or any of that. I do recall meeting with the Parks Director, Mr. Burke, and discussing the scope, but which would be step number 2. I never received a memo back outlining what we agreed the scope was and clarifying that. And it has never been scheduled or brought forward to the City Council. I've not agreed that a memo on the subject is sufficient. I've twice received a memo on the subject from the city manager that was copied to all the rest of the council members that basically says, you know, I'm not going to do this. I mean, it's a little more flowery than that, but it basically says, I'm not going to do this. So I need to know, is that going to be an official step in our process, like a 2.5 or something like that? And if it's not, and I checked to see the previous policy, what's in place now, not what's being proposed, it wasn't in there either. So if it's not in this policy, if it isn't in the existing policy and it's not going to be in the forward policy, then I want to know, why aren't we following the policy? Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, this has come up numerous times, so I have not vetoed your request. The request that came in, and I explained this in the memo to the council, was to show you a business plan for the amphitheater. We're not intending to make money on a free concert series to the public. So I don't know how one would craft a business plan when you normally would look at expenses, look at revenues, and then build a pro forma. So it was never intended to be a moneymaker for the city of Glendale. The amphitheater series was designed to bring people downtown. It'd be asking the mayor to do a business plan for the holiday parade, Christmas parade.
Well, that's not a city event, so I don't have the right
I'm just
to do
saying,
that.
I've already responded twice. And if you have a process at the council, if you want to get something put on an agenda item, you know, to be done, that's fine, but I cannot create a business plan for a free concert series.
Well, I suggest that you could. Lots of nonprofits have business plans. It measures how much they're going to be needing out of other revenues to offset whatever their specific purpose is. And just because you don't intend to make money on it doesn't mean it's not a business. As I've said before, we have an obligation to understand what the cost of this is going to be, regardless of whether it's intended to make money or not, and to have an idea of how much we're investing in it for whatever the public return is supposed to be. If we're going to invest, I don't know, 10 million or 100 million or 200 million into some project, we ought to know what it's going to look like and what it's going to be there for. But the point is, regardless of all of that, this is a council item of special interest. And the process has been clear before and clear in this draft. And nowhere in here does it say that the city manager just gets to dig in his heels and not do the process. The process is to come up with a scope and what it would cost to complete that scope in dollars and in man hours, and for it to come back to the city council and the council to decide whether or not the item of special interest is going to go forward. This is not a unilateral decision by the city manager, but that's how it's been acted.
Did you want to respond?
Well, Mayor, members of the council, again, in terms of the cost, every year this council adopts the budget that goes into our special events. So you know how much we spend on the series. It's in the budget. We also know in our DCRP, we haven't baselined the budget yet, but we know an approximate placeholder for the amphitheater improvements. I can redo the memo on both of those, but we don't have a business plan for doing it. If you want to talk about how we promote the series, we can do that. We want to talk about what we think attendance will be, we can do that. But a true business plan does not exist for something that is going to be free to the public.
So my request for the business plan isn't a public records request where it gets refused because such a thing doesn't exist. It's a council item of special interest. The outline in the policy is that staff develops the estimate of the number of man hours and the dollar cost that might be involved in developing, in this case, whatever the request is. And likewise, I mean, I think maybe I've gleaned a piece of information from your feedback today, is that apparently the only thing we plan on doing there is the Live at Murphy Park concert series, because that's all that's in our budget for that location. And you can't assume that all of the special events are going to occur there, and we get special events typically in a lump sum. But theoretically, if we're expanding the facility, one might assume that we're going to be doing more with it. And I know that's been the request of not just me, but of the council, that we do more with it. I don't think that my request is unreasonable, but even if it is, Mr. Phelps, even if my request is unreasonable, the process needs to be followed. I'm entitled to a scoping memo back from Mr. Burke, and I'm entitled to have it come forward to the council. And if the council doesn't want to do it, that's a council decision. That's not the city manager's decision. It's not in here. This is a council item of special interest. It's not a whatever the city manager wants to let you know item of special interest.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So it looks like a policy disagreement by one or maybe two council members has led to a discussion of council items of special interest and how they're processed. Would you bring up your chart with all your blue boxes again? You know what? I don't care about any of those blue boxes and how we get to certain points. I would rather see us all come to an agreement, for example, that within 30 days, staff member who was assigned the particular issue will come back to council at a workshop and ask if we want to proceed, or if a memo's already been issued, then that closes the item. I would rather set a time frame. 30 days ought to be adequate to decide whether an item is worthy of further research. And let me finish. And then secondly, if the item is assigned for further research, let's just set another time deadline of 90 days or 120 days or whatever to bring the item back for further council discussion and consideration and decision. But I don't care how the soup is made, okay? I would just like to see us come to an agreement on two time frames. Time frame to bring the scope of work for council approval to further it on or to deny it, and then a time frame when the item will finally be discussed in full by council. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Melner?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up with some of the items that I've requested in the past, and there's been a couple of times where staff has gotten together with me and said, here's kind of what you asked for. And at that point in time, the detail that they said, do you want, this kind of answers your question. Do you want to go further or is there any need to go any further? And I believe it was taken care of. I didn't need to go any further. I didn't need to bring it back to council for consensus to study the topic. And so I was happy with those outcomes. And I think that happens. I don't know all the details of this particular circumstance. I got the email about it. I was satisfied with the answers. But sometimes there are items that we request that I have found that it simply requires a memo back. And we've all seen those come back to us. This is an answer to the item of special interest, and it's an answer that is expected to be the answer. And I have found those to be adequate, and if not, then I would request at that time from that staff person to, no, I still want to move this forward to council if I felt like it wasn't properly answered. But every time I've seen it, it's always been properly answered. So I'm happy with the process and the way it's completed. I know these items of special interest put a lot of pressure and time on staff. Sometimes it takes a lot more than others. Sometimes it's a matter of answering a question. Other times it may take weeks or even months to bring it together. So I appreciate what staff does to put these items together. I've tried to make sure that when I ask for an item of special interest, that I recognize the extra time and effort it's going to take for staff to do that and make sure it's something that's really going to be beneficial for us to discuss as council. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Hugh.
Thank you, Mayor. I remember, I guess it was a while back when Councilmember Turner made the request for a business plan. But I don't fault the city manager for not coming up with a business plan. We don't have one for parks or for the aquatics that we have. Or I never looked at the amphitheater as being a profit maker. Except for Gary Sherwood gets to make money and gives it back to the city over there. It's an amenity for the people to enjoy. Maybe they come with a business plan, but I don't see how you can. We don't charge people to use our parks, our libraries, or any of our features. But I'm curious, do other cities have the opportunity to make special requests at council meetings from their staff? Anybody know?
Mayor, Councilmember Hugh, I don't know in exact. I had looked some time ago to see if other cities, just looking on their agendas, if they had a call for council items of special interest. I didn't look at every city, just kind of some of the larger cities in the valley, and it looked like we were one of a handful that have as a standing item, a council item of special interest. I think I had asked at our city managers conference, that our Arizona City Managers Conference just had inquired with a couple of managers how they handled this process, and most of them didn't have a standing item. A few of them said they have like a strategic retreat annually where members are able to kind of bring things forward that aren't necessarily part of the normal workflow for it to be considered during the, but there are a handful of cities that do have the opportunity at like a meeting, but most of them don't have it as a standing item. City of Glendale has since, at least till 2016 when we first instituted the original draft of the administrative policy.
Thank you.
I'll give my comment. One of the advantages of having this much gray hair is the fact that I've had a chance to live an awful long time and witness a lot of things, and I do have a pretty good memory most of the time. My father, when he was alive, when I was very young, wanted to be a farmer. He loved that idea. We had chickens and pig and a couple cattle and turkeys and all sorts of different things. My dad was under the impression that if you had a small farm and you bought chicken feed and your property and fencing and all the different things it took to make that happen, that you would sell your eggs and my mother used to literally churn the milk and make butter, and my father was under the impression that you could sell that product at the end of the year and he was going to make money. But I remember my dad coming home one day after going to the tax man. Again, we're at the tax time right now. And my dad was really upset because the tax man told my father, you can't claim your farm as a business. And my dad said, well, I'm spending money and I'm selling a product. And he said, but you've been doing that for 8 years and you've lost money every year. So it's not a business, it's a hobby. It's a hobby. It's not a business. You can't claim a business when you're not making money. And so my point to Mr. Phelps' answer is we've never planned on making money. It's not a business plan. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have some idea of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But we all vote on how much money we're going to spend. We already know that answer. So I do tend to agree with Mr. Phelps in the fact it's not a business plan. I don't know how you could warrant to that. A plan maybe, but not a business plan. So just sitting here thinking of that and thought of my dad and how much I miss him, but I remember my dad was pretty comical sometimes too. So he wasn't a farmer, he was a hobbyist.
Mayor, go ahead.
Mayor?
I'll yield.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Eldama, you're on the phone. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to remind everybody, we're not here today to discuss whether or not the business plan was the right thing to do. We're here because I called for an item of interest because of items of interest that had not been brought back. I felt necessary that we create a policy that was already a policy. Today's action was really no action. It was just for the city manager to outline what I worked with on staff and what his team and he came up with, and there was really no consensus. It was just the administrative policy that was created to address all of our items of interest. I think that it's wise for us to have a policy that allows us to give items of interest, but more so the time frame, and that's really what we're here for. Simply because of the dialogue that the city manager and Councilmember Turner are having is why we need that policy. So the policy just needs the item of interest just needs to return to the council, and we give consensus, move forward, study it more or not, and it's done. So I hear a lot of conversation about the business policy. We're actually here for an item of interest, and I'd like to see us continue with this policy that the city manager and staff created for us to look at today. Thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Well, with all due respect to the mayor's father, perhaps if he'd had a business plan, he would have realized that it was a hobby instead of a business. A business plan doesn't have to show a profit if that's not the intention of the business. And the business we're in, the public's business, if I need to remind anybody, we should have a clear idea of what the future expenses we're committing councils that come after us to. We also should be able to have a clear idea for the residents we have now as to be able to explain, here's the concept, here's why we're spending, in this case, $10 million. We should be able to perhaps even point to other cities that are doing this successfully and what their turnout is and how it helps things. That's what I'm asking for in my special interest. And it is right, this conversation today is not about my specific special interest, but mine serves as an example. It was not processed under the policy we have. There was no scoping memo created by the director who met with the council member. There was no bringing it back to the council member didn't agree with a scoping memo that says, yeah, this is fine, now I know what I wanted to know. And there was no bringing it back to the council, and it was clear that it wouldn't be. No bringing it back to the council to present it to the council as something that they could either choose to go down or not, or take part of it and say, yeah, that could be valuable to us for the energy expended. So I'm just saying, if we have a policy, we should follow it. And if it needs a step number 2.5 that says the city manager doesn't have to follow this policy, then put that in there. That's how I opened this today. There's a step missing. And if we don't want to have a policy that the city manager can ignore, then we shouldn't let the city manager ignore it. Now, I didn't come in here today expecting a bunch of support on this. But I don't sit up here because I've got the support of 4 or 5 or 6 other council members. I sit up here because I have the support of the people in my district. They elected me to do this job, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. I don't care who I upset doing it. I don't upset people intentionally, but I'm not going to retreat just because somebody gets upset. Somebody doesn't want to do the work, doesn't want to follow the policy. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. You have brought a recommended policy before us for how to handle council items of special interest. I don't support it. I would, as I said before, I would rather just see 2 adopted timeframes and let it go at that, and then let staff and the council member work out how they achieve meeting those timeframes. So, thank you for your hard work and putting together 20 steps. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous 20-step program. But I'm not interested in that. I just want something clean and simple. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Milner?
I take a little bit of offense in a few of the comments that Councilmember Turner made. It seemed to insinuate things that I didn't think was appropriate. But nevertheless, I do believe that there is a valid use of a council item of special interest. I don't know that it needs to be as detailed as we're making it. I know we've asked for a more detailed process in the past because of perhaps not exactly getting what was desired from the request. Each time that I've asked for an item of special interest, it's usually been a very brief, here's the scope, is that what you're looking for? And then, okay, from there, do we want to go to the next step, which is to prepare a statement for the council to consider, and then from there decide if the council wants to spend the money to actually do the whole process. And I think those steps, I think, are good and important to continue. However, as I stated earlier, I believe that there are times that we waste a lot of staff time on items of special interest that may or may not be something that we should be getting into at that point in time. That's all. That's my only concern, is I don't want to see us spend literally sometimes hundreds of hours on developing not just the scope, but then preparing it and doing it. Now, if council has directed us, because you've come back to council and said, okay, go ahead and let's do this item of special interest, then the council has agreed to spend that time and effort. But I think we need to recognize that every minute we take away from staff's time to do that, we're taking away from their time to do their everyday job of serving the public. And they do cross. I mean, we need to take care of business. So bottom line is, I believe having a form of a council item of special interest is important. I think it can be simple. Simply bringing forward a scope, spending a few minutes literally with the council member saying, is this what you were looking for? And then perhaps bringing that back to council in a workshop saying, do we want to do this? And this is what it's going to cost. At that point in time, if the council says, yes, we want you to spend that amount of energy of staff's time, then we move forward. And I think that's an appropriate process. But again, I just need to reemphasize the amount of time that we spend on these is pretty significant. And I want to make sure that we're being wise, and I would maybe ask staff, to be very concrete in the amount of time that they expect that this process is going to cost, and what in terms of time, but also what it may cost in opportunity cost where the staff can't do something else. That would be my only concern in the process, but I think having a process is important to continue.
Sitting here thinking, I rarely have a council item of special interest. I have gone out of my way to try to just simply ask questions before I go to that point, just to find out whether it's feasible or, what's opinions of different staff. Of the few times I've done that, staff has come back to me and said, how detailed do you want to go? How much information do you need? Sometimes it's nothing more than just a simple answer. I wonder if maybe we shouldn't start off this idea of the secession. Maybe the first thing should just simply be a text message or an email to our city manager saying, could I get some information on this, to find out whether it's something that we want to continue to go. And I think that's where Councilmember Mellor was going. I don't know if we need to go head deep into it immediately, because I think a lot of times a simple question might answer our question, or simple question might get us a simple answer. But with that, Mr. Phelps.
Mayor.
A second, Mr. Aldama.
Members of council, again, just as a reminder, again, this came up because there have been situations since I've been the city manager where we haven't addressed in a prompt manner some of the council items of special interest, and we heard that frustration over the past year. And so when Councilmember Aldama brought this up, he agreed to kind of sit down and try to understand. Remember, this is a process that I use to manage, to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. Brent does a lot of other things other than handle CSIOs, and so does my other leadership team. But based on I think some correct frustration by the council, one, I assigned the responsibility to Brent to oversee. But then what we need internally then is a process, and that's how I'm able to hold him accountable and how he's able to take this process and hold those department directors accountable as well. So we appreciated the item coming up by Councilmember Aldama. We wanted to make sure we had not missed a step along the way, but this is really designed to be a tool that I, as a city manager, because I track a variety of issues on a daily basis, that even though I'm not paying attention to this item, we've got a schedule in place and we're trying to be responsive. Again, certainly I understand Councilmember Turner's frustration with the difference on the business plan, but again, as being pointed out, we're trying to come up with a process that does meet the meat of the council and that we can manage internally so that my leadership team that are primarily out here in the audience this afternoon, they understand what the expectation is as well from a timely response matter and whatever. So again, we'll continue to receive input as we go along, but this is a framework for us to manage so that we meet your expectations as a council.
Mr. Aldama.
Thank you, Mayor. Piggyback off the city manager's comments. I heard two council members, the mayor and the council member talked about committee steps, and I heard one council member talk about there's a lot of work that staff has to do, and that's exactly what this does. I mean, a lot of this is confusing because there's so many written steps, but a lot of the written steps are already happening. Nothing's really changed. I think the 60 days is quite long, and that's changed, but really this helps our staff understand what our requests are and better manage them, and it helps the city manager manage the entire process. So everything that you're reading already happens. Staff or Mr. Stoddard just wrote it down so we could see it. But really, the process is only 4, maybe 5 steps. You ask for it, you meet with staff, they scope it, they send it back to you. You like it, great. If you don't want to go forward, it dies there. If it goes forward, it goes to the council. We give consensus to move forward or not, and we're done. If it goes forward, then it may become a policy vote later, but all of this written steps are already happening. Just wanted you to know that. They're just written so we can see them. And I think that having a policy will help both administrative side and the legislative side. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to respond to a couple of things. I think the city manager acknowledged what the real issue is, and that is there were council items of special interest that were not responded to in a timely manner, and in some cases, council members had to wait a year or more to get their item attended to. I think that's where the initial frustration occurred. And I do agree that it gets back to timing. And how long are you going to give before a item of special interest is either resolved through a memo or is taken to workshop for decision about further action? Again, it's a timing process to me. And if staff needs the blue chart on how to make sausage to do their job, that's fine. Then I'll go along with it if that's what y'all need to do it. And the other comment I wish to make is with regard to the comment about some of these are a waste of time. May be a waste of time in another council member's eyes, but in the council member who brought it, it was a serious matter, and it wasn't a waste of time to that council member. Sometimes the council member is directly responding to citizen requests who would like to see further action on a particular issue. So I don't consider bringing an item forward a waste of time, and I do appreciate the mayor's comments because he's right. Often a lot of these issues are resolved in that first sit-down with a staff member, where the staff member provides perhaps the answer to the question, and it is determined that a memo to all of council is sufficient. So that has happened frequently as well. But again, for me, it's a matter of timing. But if staff needs the blue chart to fulfill that timing, so be it.
Yeah, so,
Thank you.
So again, my question, either Mr. Phelps or yourself, can that first step be just, rather than a council item of special interest, can it just simply be a text or an email or a memo to the city manager about the question to find out whether we have to go to a council item of special interest?
Mayor, members of the council, again, I think the council has the right of inquiry, whatever they feel comfortable. Certainly, I'm always welcome for people to reach out directly and to ask a question or to send me a memo. But if they want to make it more formal, then we also have the council item of special interest. But really, we're adaptable to either. It really needs to meet the needs of the council.
Yeah, my concern, as always, is that I know staff. This last few years, everybody's been hammered. Everybody's been busy. I don't want to burden them with extra work if it's not necessary, but if it's a simple answer, rather than go through the formal process, it'd be nice to be able to just ask that question, whether it's an email or a text. I would like to see that as number one, and then all the other stuff I have no problem with. If that's not sufficient for the council, then go ahead and go through the process. At least there is a process that everybody understands. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Oh, so much, but I'll keep it direct. I do agree that if council members either would sometimes maybe do their homework or ask the question to the appropriate staff member, that they might get their question answered. I've seen that happen in the past. There's times where I've had a item of interest, I think once or twice maybe, that the answer wasn't readily apparent, but a memo providing the answer was presented and accepted. There were, on this particular item of interest, it had other components to it besides the business plan, which were additionally ignored. But to today's question of our policy and more specifically, the revisions to our policy. Don't mistake me. I support having a policy. I support the revisions to it that you presented, and I support the policy being used. What I wouldn't support is the policy not being used or the policy having steps that aren't aware to us or to the public. So as presented, I will support this policy as revised. You have my support and a consensus with what staff has presented. I would like to see how it works. I think that this is a good solution that lets everybody know what the expectations are and the time frame in which they should be expecting an answer. And if a response isn't available in the 30 days because we're hiring a person that would have that answer or whatever, short-staffed or whatever, at least the feedback of that, that we recognize your item of interest, we have it on our schedule, we're going to miss the 30-day deadline, here's when we think we can do it, that would be in order. So don't get me wrong, I do support having a policy, I do support this that's been presented, I'll be part of a consensus to accept it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so my question, is there a consensus for what's been presented?
Yes.
All right, next.
Downtown Campus Reinvestment Project Update, Community Meetings.
Mayor, members of the council, here's an update as we're trying to keep the council fully informed with our project downtown, and it'll be led by Eddie Garcia and our folks from Holly Street, Diane Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As stated, this is an update of our two most recent community engagement meetings that we had regarding the Downtown Campus Reinvestment Project. And for the record, my name is Eddie Garcia, Principal Architect with the City of Glendale, and alongside me today is Diane Jacobs, Principal of Holly Street Studio. So there's not a big agenda, and this is not requiring a consensus today, but we have about 20 slides, then I believe you have handouts in front of you. And we're gonna highlight the two meetings. We're gonna talk a little bit about where we started. The first engagement was October 26th, as you'll recall. That's the first time we introduced the project to the public. We'll walk through the building and campus meeting that we had on March 15th, and followed by the Murphy Park meeting that we had on March 29th. We'll talk a little bit about what we heard and summarize next steps as well. So just a recap, as part of our recap, October 26th, as I mentioned, this was the first time we met with the public formally, and it was an open forum type scenario that we had. And what we had come out of that meeting was some general topics and some essentially tenets to the project as far as some guiding principles that we heard from the community. And these varied across the board from their experience and how they'd see City Hall, and to some of the amenities they'd like to see, and how they would interact with the project from, both Murphy Park, and then how they would actually use the services of City Hall itself. So rather than going through every single one of these bullets, but you can see that it's across the board, begins to identify how our community really is reacting to this project, and the personalized approach they have taken in meeting with our team in these meetings has been wonderful. It's been very positive and constructive. And just you can see on the left-hand side some of the topics that were covered, everywhere from music in the park, which is really driven by the amphitheater, to shade structures, to the sustainability of the site, including shade and trees and the proper vegetation. As I mentioned, this was a forum, and this was a 2-hour session that we had here in this room. It attended quite well. I think there was anywhere between 35 to 40 people that attended. Yeah. It was an open forum, but we used technology in this meeting. We had some voting technology that was simple to use, so we can gather some information. But we covered both the City Hall component itself and the entire campus, which included Murphy Park. So this was the first stage. But out of that, we learned that our next engagement meeting that we had, because this was only a singular location, The next thing we learned out of this came, and some of this came from everyone in this room, is that we wanted to cast a broader net of how we were going to communicate the next 2 meetings that were going to come up, and how we would do it as far as an open forum approach. So the communication team got together and we really stepped it up. We looked at a couple different ways to get the message out. The traditional methods through the media has been the simple flyers and so forth, and we posted them throughout the building here as well. Using social media platforms for sure. But the big step forward was using the billboards. I think there was about 3 of them, if I recall. This one's off of the 101 to advertise the event. So definitely getting a meeting out and casting a much broader net. And again, the idea being an open forum. So we wanted to do this in multiple locations. And one of the things that we thought was going to be very effective was to have a preamble, if you will, a live stream interview with Diane and her team. And then we had a number of boards that created a gallery of information, a lot of collateral, design collateral, that much of which has been shared before with the council, and to interact with our community. So the 3 locations that we picked was Hero Libraries, the council chambers here, and the FRAC location, the Foothills Recreation and Aquatic Center. And at the bottom, you can see, unfortunately, I think on the screen it's clipped off a little bit, but there was a count of 9, 20, and 5. There was about 9 folks that showed up at Heroes Library, approximately 20 here at Council, and 5 at FRAC. And this is excluding any City of Glendale staff and any of the design team members that were here. And we say they're approximate because we did have some sign-in sheets. We just can't confirm if everybody did sign in. But nevertheless, it was a good turnout. And if you recall, our first day was March 15th. It was, we had quite a few rain showers that afternoon, and we weren't sure if that would discourage people from coming out, but that wasn't the case at all. So many people tuned in, not only locally, but they also tuned in on the live stream as well. So, and we have some stats to share with you later in the presentation. So on the 15th, we talked a little bit about the building and the campus in whole. And most of that was how we were thinking about the renovation overall, how we were investing our dollars here into the project. So there was a series of boards that talked about the building typologies, what a City Hall is, some before and after approaches, and how the campus plan was developing. And a lot of this was focusing on circulation, navigation, where front door was going to be, the circulation from the garage to a plaza, the plaza out to Murphy Park and the amphitheater and council. And so the community had an opportunity to look over many of these ideas, and you can see a little bit of all the graphics, and there was quite a bit of collateral that was shared. So there was a whole gallery of information, as I mentioned, and it was an opportunity for staff and the design team to engage one-on-one directly with the public. And we wanted to make it as approachable as possible. So this was a great opportunity in an open house format to have more of a one-on-one meeting with our community versus having us present to them what the project's about. This was a great opportunity for them to approach us and talk about what they see and provide their both input and feedback from what they were seeing. So here's some examples of what we heard specifically regarding the building idea. And many of this is based on, again, the images that we had in front of them, but they broke it down into a couple of categories: the identity of their place in whole, the public spaces and how they would interact with them, and then the vitality of the campus itself. So under the identity, I think this was all centered around some of the images that spoke to the rebranding, if you will, of our building's vocabulary and how that was impacting them. And the comments that we heard was really supportive of identity as an iconic element, and updating that as far as the building, and potentially using materials that are appropriate to Arizona and makes it feel like it's from Arizona to our project itself. Even some comments about glazing, how much is too much, how much is too little. But basically what that's reflecting is the orientation of what this building vocabulary would be like. Then on public spaces, the opportunity to be thinking more about the flexibility and the versatility of our public spaces, but how do we get there? So, open offices in City Hall are better for light and flexibility. There was comments about just the environment in which we work in. I think the next one we wanted to talk about was huge disconnect between city and public today, bring public into the building, was more about the fact of the wayfinding, not knowing how the front door works, where the one-stop shop might be, how our services are going to interact with us, and reacting to the plan that they're seeing with a new front door, new one-stop shop center, et cetera, was bringing the public to the building, so that was good. Knowing what services available, the daylight approach, open stairwell ideas that they saw in some of the building sections that were displayed, and even some particulars, if for coming from the garage, just potentially from an ADA perspective, how do you circulate from the garage to the front door, and possibly adding an elevator, et cetera, to make that much easier. And then regarding the campus plan, some of the comments we heard was really supported from the very first meeting was, the venues for music, for instance, and how that works with the new amphitheater approach. Things that would keep people all day, opportunities for programming activities throughout the day in the park, suggestion of a splash pad, for instance. And then even as far as just how much more of a park can you make? And part of the comments we heard, and you'll see some of this later on as well in Murphy Park, was the fact that the library footprint is very prominent in Murphy Park. And in terms of, how do we adjust for that, or, whether it stays, whether it goes, or how do you adopt it later on? And then just the fact that from a sustainability standpoint, park irrigation came up a little bit in some of the commentary, keeping things healthy, sustainable for a long period. And I think some of that might have come out of the idea of before, where questions were asked about the irrigation system once before and how we can improve upon that. And then just from an investment standpoint, we're investing $70 million into the project. How do we bring more community functions into the building? And then on the 29th, that was approximately 2 weeks after that, we did the same thing again. So we held Murphy Park in 3 locations. The turnout was a little bit different this time around, but nevertheless, we had about the same in total of participation between both days and both events, including online. So I'm going to have Diane walk you through the next series of slides regarding Murphy Park. There you go.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I will say the strategy of a widespread engagement, although we've never been in 3 places at the same time on multiple occasions, it felt like it worked pretty well because we got such a variety of input, and we were also allowed to have one-on-one conversations. What was clear in the March 15th presentation that Eddie just described was that people were pretty enthusiastic about the City Hall buildings, but were really more excited about what was going to be in the park. So the fact that shortly after the 15th, we came back on the 29th within 2 weeks sort of helped the momentum of things. A little bit about what was described on March 29th was we shared 3 different park schemes that basically describe different concepts. So I'm just going to go through each one. The point was just to be able to look at different parcels within the park and understand how we might use this open space. So the first one shows kind of more of a classic kind of layout that describes a little bit about what you now have, but with a refresher and a renovation of additional trees and program spaces. And we shared with the public images to help them picture what these things were all about, and we were able to have one-on-one conversations. So most of the folks were very excited about the idea of open space, both in the park and in the first level of City Hall. The number of ideas presented to us as how that space might be activated inside as well as outside were very original and exciting and tied back to a lot of the comments we heard from you earlier. They were, restrooms became an issue, and we are providing for restrooms in the park. We can talk about that. Walking paths, there was a great deal of affection and interest in protecting the landscape and the trees and also adding to that. The idea about the library continues to come up. That is out of our scope, but folks look at it and have a lot to say about that particular amenity as a service, but also as an object in the park. There was talk about where the library should go, might go, the idea about seating within the park, space for a farmer's market, the idea of the park not just being interesting and refreshing to visit, but also something you could stand back from and be proud of, and with a nice edge that faces the city was also brought up quite a lot. Ideas about exercise and outdoor activity spaces came up a lot as well. The next scheme shows something that looks a little bit more like a grove, kind of densifying the landscape on the east side of the park and creating almost like this sort of C-shaped form that allows you to come in from the northeast corner and the northwest corner and sort of spin around and come directly into the municipal center. These spaces around the library show kind of a densification of landscape. All schemes have items that are interchangeable, but some of the things we showed here was the idea of art that could also be played on by children, the idea of paths for farmers markets, event lawns, and different kind of activity spaces within. And what we were encouraged by, the conversations with the public, was again the idea of seating, of lights, maybe kind of a permanent lighting solution so that you could add sort of twinkle to the park at any different given time of the year. The amount of greenery, the type of greenery was also discussed. The idea of a gentle slope coming from the street level and allowing you to negotiate kind of the amphitheater zone was also well received. The idea of a place for weddings, a place to have kind of festivities, and shade, shade, shade is always brought up when we talk about this park. They asked about considering more positive foot traffic, the idea of creating energy within the first level of city council as well as within the park, allowing for that activity to maybe sort of take care of some of the challenges in the park right now that is kind of more stagnant and more sort of providing more opportunities for maybe unsavory behavior within the park. Folks really like the idea of seeing more color, whether it was in the landscape or in the public art in the space, and the idea for keeping it really open and connected to the neighborhood. And finally, the third scheme is kind of a hybrid between the first two, but we're sort of playing with geometry a little bit of the given angles of the existing facilities. And this one, we asked people to focus on the possibility of different activity pockets within the park, and the idea of bioswales, which a lot of people were excited to talk about, a way of naturally retaining water. The park has to retain water anyway by code, but how do we sort of help this happen by the way we shape the landscape and create these zones that will then sort of nourish the green life that's there already. We looked at different kind of zones for seating, a yoga lawn, ideas about kind of outdoor plazas coming into the space. Always coming back to what people love the most was this sort of lush green town center. No matter how we sliced it or how the arrangements were, the common themes kept coming back of wanting to have a point of pride. I think many people felt that other places within Glendale brought opportunities to gather in a very new and exciting way, for example, out at Westgate or even with the stadium and other amenities. But there was kind of a warm-hearted sort of desire for connection at this smaller scale that was a little bit more traditional in the sense, again, of activity and sort of human sort of consumption rather than kind of these grander pieces. And so the idea of these smaller pockets of things to do, but also this point of pride for the city kept coming up over and over again when we talked to folks. And the list goes on. You will have all of these things available. There's a lot of repetition here. Folks didn't want us to modernize it too much, whatever that means. I think it meant keep it a place that's really nice to just sit and visit or walk through. The idea of also having art and clocks and lamps, and folks like the idea of having a place to do something that was flexible and open and festive, but at the same time be able to visit with someone on a Tuesday morning. So very traditional in nature, but very excited about amenities that technology will bring and additional kind of features of the park will help make happen.
And as we mentioned before, this was live streamed and recorded, and this is a clip from our website. But we did have both the 15th, the 29th, and including the 26th on our website, so folks can actually watch the entire video and learn all about the design and the process in which we have put forth, and learn a bit more about the amenities in the park and the building itself. Great feedback cards as well, so we did this both with high-tech, low-tech. Some folks were comfortable leaving us comment cards. They can scan. There was a QR code associated with a comments card that goes right to an email address if they wanted to do that as well. Or most folks interacted directly with us one-on-one, and given the sort of the demographics of the folks that attended, a lot of them were very comfortable working with the Holly Street staff and their team directly and providing feedback on yellow stickies and so forth. So if they didn't feel comfortable writing things down themselves, they had someone from the team there to assist them and place them on the boards for our feedback. So it was very interactive, very engaging, and we think it was very successful. And by the stats, you can see that several hundred more looked at the streams, and a lot of great comments there. And we didn't see anything live comments or questions during when we first started both sessions. But nevertheless, you can see that there was quite a views afterwards. And then since then, there's been about 13 additional emails, roughly, give or take, that have come in directly to the website with questions asked. And we're doing our best to address those with the team as they come along. And so here we are from a summary standpoint. I think the big takeaway, in addition to what Diane has mentioned, is not only do we have this great enthusiasm, but there is some consensus within the community coming up with the sort of the principles that we're taking with the development of the design, and there's consistency from what we heard from October 26th. And I think that's a testament to the team listening and showing how the design is evolving and picking up where we began together, and so they're seeing that today in these images. Back to the shade opportunities, whether it's just from the straight vegetation of tree canopies, et cetera, or structural elements on the building or pavilions that are part of the park. Shade was very clearly on the minds and front and center with the community. The sustainable principles as well, the use of water, how we're going to irrigate all of our vegetation, and preventing things from flood prevention, and how we're going to retain water on site to benefit our plants. Security and safety is still prominent. It's again, these are not in any particular order, but security and safety is still a measure of success. But architecturally, aligning promenades and all those different circulation ideas that Diane expressed in A, B, and C are all viable solutions to do that with, and make this something that's a much longer stay in the park versus just moments in time briefly during the day. More community space. The diversity of that space is important. The programmability of that space. Public art was something that came in, and a lot of it was also in the commentary that was in the emails. Gallery space, or opportunities more for art to be integral to this project, whether it's display or integrated within the park. And then, last but not least, is just the future of El Matig. It's there. It's part of the fabric of what we have downtown. But there was just comments about it. We felt it was important, nevertheless, to state its presence there. But here, I think what I want to reinforce with our team as well is that there was just an overall excitement in these last two meetings about what we're doing on this project. Very positive, and I think if anything, these two meetings, including the very first one in the beginning, is really giving our community an opportunity to not just voice what they're thinking, but to be part of the process. And we do appreciate that, and I think it's been very successful these last two meetings. So what's next steps? It looks like we might be missing it on the main screen. But next steps ahead is that we plan on another schematic design workshop, hopefully before the summer break, before the July summer break happens. And that's tentative at the moment because we want to make sure we have the best information to put forth when we're ready. And then we're hoping by that time, the next community engagement will be around the same time or shortly after that in the summer of 2023. And that'll be the building and the park all together, the whole campus, as it's been presented so far. So with that, that concludes our presentation, and we're open to addressing any of the questions you may have.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I want to thank you for having these public meetings. I've always said that this was the people's house, and now the people are beginning to realize what this design, whatever it ends up being, cannot be all things to all people. And there is a potpourri of suggestions in here. I don't know who makes the decision, whether it's council or you recommend to us or what, but we've got to settle on several core concepts or goals. And I think I'm talking mainly about the park, because there's not a lot of interest in how the employees are going to work in the building. I don't think you heard a lot about that so much. People are focused on the park and whatever open spaces there will be in City Hall. And so that's where my remarks are directed. When I think of the park area, which is where I'm addressing my comments today, 3 concepts come to mind to me. 1, iconic. 2, stately. She's like your grandmother. She's been around a long time. She deserves some respect. And thirdly, communal, because that's what we're hearing from the public, is this idea of a gathering space. I was pleasantly surprised to hear about the library, and that people are now suggesting that perhaps the library should be moved and that space consumed more by park. I've always wanted to move the library, and everybody is aghast at the thought, but I think there's an opportunity to not only move the library, but modernize it and bring it up to date so that it truly serves our next generation of children, which is primarily technology focused. Someone suggested all kinds of children's activities at the park. I don't think that's appropriate, to tell you the truth. We have lots of neighborhood parks with swings and play equipment. I don't think that is what this park is intended to be, is another children's playground. And lastly, my last comment is, you and we have a tiger by the tail. It does not matter what the final design is. Half of the people will love it and half of the people will hate it. So we're just going to have to bite the bullet, make some final decisions on council about where we're going and what it's going to be, and just live with it and support our decision. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for holding these public events, and I echo Councilmember Clark, Vice Mayor Clark's sentiments about that. I'm happy that we've been doing as much outreach. It is kind of a sad thing when 35 people in a city of 240,000 is a good turnout, but we'll take what we can get, right? And provide other non-in-person ways for people to contribute. And you can only work with the people that show up. And we do a lot of reach out in this city or outreach, and we can only get to the people who really do want to be involved, listen, and put in some effort. So we do what we can, and I appreciate that. Let's see, what's today, the 11th of April? Mark it down in your calendars. Councilmember Clark and I agree on just about everything she said. Because I think we're getting the same feedback and we have the same affection for our community. The green spaces in the park are important, and oasis-type feel, the respect for the grand old dam that the park is. That's what I hear from residents. And that's not to say that nothing can be changed about it. It's just like, do it all carefully. You know, you don't want to break this old gal's hip. The couple of things I'd want to bring up: has there been much conversation about the brick sidewalks and the bronze plaques that are dedicated to community members?
There has been conversation to the extent that we know that those are valuable and important and need to somehow be incorporated in any new designs.
Okay. I will say to that subject, and I think we discussed it months ago, is that one of the things I look for is the ad hoc paths that show up in a park space or a business space where you can tell that the public has their own idea of where the sidewalk should go. And I don't see that in our existing Murphy Park. I think that the pattern that we have there does pretty well meet the needs of the community, because otherwise we would see some ad hoc sidewalks, dirt walks, I guess I should say. I better put my glasses on. One or more of these conceptuals show the elimination of parking on Glendale Avenue. Was there community reaction to that? And if so, what was it?
Interestingly, there wasn't much discussion. There may have been a comment that I didn't hear, but there wasn't much discussion about parking, other than it seemed that folks were more excited about additional trees and additional pedestrian space. And that was very positive looking at that. I think you're speaking of the southeast corner of the park.
Yeah. Right, the south side, Glendale Avenue side.
Yeah.
When I saw the conceptuals that had that removed and more grass and trees and the sidewalk removed from the traffic, but the park really rolling all the way out to curbside, I thought that was a pretty darn good idea, and it really would freshen up our look there and get all of that steel and glass and chrome out of people's way of seeing how beautiful the park is. I realize that merchants are sensitive about losing parking spaces, but if all in all it makes our downtown more attractive so more people want to come, then I think that can be a win. I find it interesting that how often the idea of farmers market comes up in not just your meetings, but almost everything. And there's nobody loves a farmer's market more than I do. But I mean, we have tried that so many times here in downtown Glendale, in Murphy Park, over at the Methodist Church, one block over, Civic Center. And they just haven't ever been able to be successful. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep trying, but I am saying we shouldn't dedicate hardscape to it. Okay? There's plenty of flat grass and all to do the farmer's market. It's a limited time of the year that you can do that anyway. I just wouldn't want to hardscape that function into it. I'm pleased at the number of times art has come up in this conversation. Art in Murphy Park, art in the council, in the City Hall building, the concept of a art museum in City Hall, I've heard from people, and I think that is something that would set us aside from other communities, that would be very customer friendly, I guess, and for the traffic on Glendale Avenue to look over and see that, man, there's an art gallery there. That's something I want to come back and see. I think that, and it also expresses, I think, who we decide we want to be as a community. We are the first city in America that dedicated a percentage of our capital improvement budget to purchasing public art, and I think we should. I think we've done a fine job of it. We have plenty of great art. Let's get it out there where people can see it. We've clearly recognized that art is part of economic development, and I think that first floor is a great place to combine those two concepts together. Library, I do think that I think we need to study it and study it hard. It tugs at my heartstrings. It tugs at the heartstrings of so many people that talk to me. I don't know what the demographics are down here. I don't know what the right library for downtown Glendale is in this day and age, but I've visited plenty of cities across the country that have done amazing things with their libraries. And I think that that's what we should be striving for here too. And so I'm not advocating removing the library, but I do think it's a bigger, something we need to look at. But as you said, not part of this scope, but it is like our next big thing to look at. And if it needs to be married in, so be it. And the last thing is that I guess the one thing I disagree with the vice mayor on is I don't think we need to settle for having half the community mad at us and half the community happy with us. I think that if we continue with open dialogue and having, considering every option and trying to choose the best of them, that I think we can end up with a win-win. And that doesn't mean everybody gets what everybody wants. It means that everybody understands why they didn't get what they wanted and that they're still happy with what they did get. So that's my charge to you. Carry on. Thank you. Thank you,
Mayor
Mayor.
and council, we're going to shoot for at least 3/4 happy.
Mr. Miller?
Thank you. Again, thank you for the presentation. I think it was very effective to get out to the community and hear what the citizens were concerned about and take into account those things. I agree that the arts could be a great opportunity for us to incorporate a little more arts into our campus. I think that's something we lack in downtown Glendale. And I think it only emphasizes what you discovered during your conversations is that we really do need to come up with a comprehensive plan for our library. And as we discussed in our workshop a few weeks ago, incorporating some monies into the current budget so that we can start incorporating, at least design-wise, what we think would work with the current library so that we don't, complete our downtown campus and then decide to start designing the library and then decide that something needs to be changed that could have already been incorporated into what we're doing here. So those would be my only comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah. What I'm going to bring up is what we talked about when we had our very first meeting. I think the library is critical to downtown Glendale. I think we should have a library. I just don't think we should have it there. I really think we should be looking at moving that more north and east to a building that we currently have now over by the Bead Museum. In place of the library, what I would love to see is something that I think everybody could agree on very easily because it serves so many different purposes, is a large gazebo. And I don't mean a little one. I don't mean one 20 feet in radius, but something maybe like 40 feet in radius that's elevated. It could be used for art shows. It could be used for wine festivals. It could be used for jazz. Somebody wanted to come out and play. It could be used for weddings. It could be used for a farmer's market all the way around the outside of it. I mean, there are so many different options that you could do with that. And the fact that it reminds a lot of people of the states that they moved from. All you have to do is watch almost any movie. Groundhog Day is a great example. Puxtony Phil. I mean, that's the center location where everybody meets. They meet at the gazebo in downtown. I understand that what I'm bringing up is something that we talked about several months ago. It hasn't been discussed, but my biggest concern is if we don't seriously think about something like that now. By removing that particular library, I think you'll get more park space. I think you can get more trees. I think you can get a more center that people would come out and enjoy. My concern is if you don't think about it seriously now and we turn around and start putting trees and things in a very short time, we're going to go back and start tearing things back out again, which I don't think makes any sense. A gazebo is not a monster expense. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't require air conditioning. It doesn't require plumbing. It just simply needs electricity. But that would be something that I would love to see seriously talked about, considered. And I think that you would find if you could come up with some good concepts, I think you'd find the general public probably would be overwhelmingly in support.
Mayor?
Ed.
Yeah, thank you. I met with the city manager several months ago and a couple of weeks ago, just recently. Maybe the city manager can explain the next steps for the library and the design costs. We're going to bring it up in the next budget meeting, but maybe the city manager can bring it up now. And then secondly, whatever ideas any of us have, I feel that we need to go back out to the community because the library is a significant amenity to the community and not just any district. It's for anybody that wants to use it. And so whether some of the council member wants to move it or build a gazebo out of it, I think it's best left partially in the hands of the community, and the council members can also add their input. But this thing really needs to be studied and not just throw a couple of hours into it. So if possible, maybe the city manager can talk about the next steps in design costs and where you were going with that, Mayor.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, yes, this will be on the workshop or our budget update on the 25th. We're going to come forward with some CIP discussion, including based on the council direction from a prior meeting to put money in for the first part of programming and preliminary design for the library. I don't have specific numbers here yet ready to share with the council, but we'll have that ready in time for for the meeting on the 25th. But the steps would typically be is we would begin the programming element, which we think is important for a library. That programming would be facilitating really a number of, making sure that we're getting feedback from a number of different constituents, both internal and external. So we want to talk to patrons of the library, we want to talk to library staff, and really it starts with programming in a library. And then once you understand what you want that library to be, then you can start getting into some of your site planning and then eventually into your design. But we'll have more discussion coming up on the 25th.
Any other discussion? Thank you. Okay, next item is city manager's report. Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of council, just a real quick, and this is really just more anecdotal for the council as we talk about often about what's happening in our development area on the 303 and what the market is doing right now. If you recall, the Cubes at Glendale is a big project the council approved and annexed in some time ago. It's basically part of a 5.5 million square feet Class A industrial space, and it's just kind of right between Reams Road and Northern, if you recall, when we did our site plan. Well, one of the buildings of this because it's a number of buildings, about a 570,000 square foot building, just was announced it was sold for $82.6 million, almost $145 a foot. And so one of the things when we talk about a forecast for revenue, we share with the council what we think revenues will be, but we don't count anything that's not been built yet. But it's estimated that this particular sale will net about between $800,000 and $1 million to the city. And so again, the market continues to be very strong along the Loop 303, and we continue to see the capital markets willing to invest in our community. But I say it because this wasn't part of our forecast. Now that we know there's a sale coming forward, we'll build it into our forecast. But this is another example of just the success the city has had with regards to economic development, especially in the Loop 303 area. And that concludes my report, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Mr. Bailey.
No report, thank you.
Council item of special interest, Mr. Aldama.
Yes, Mayor, I do have one. My item of interest is if staff, I'd like to meet with staff so we can look into study and possibly return to a council workshop. The City of Mesa's recent adopted policy and approved and voted by the council. It's an employee retention policy, and it's employee post-retirement health benefits for employees who retire from the city, and that would be for both sworn and for civilian employees. So I'd like to have that go through the process and meet with staff. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Hugh.
Nothing, Mayor.
Councilmember Milner.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Councilmember Turner.
Not today, Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
Nothing today, Mayor.
I have nothing. Motion to go into executive session.
So move.
Second.
I have a motion, I have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Council meeting is recessed for executive session. Thank you all.